We're going live. Hey, we're on the air. Excellent. Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, as Brian always says on his podcast. This is Stu Miniman, and thanks for everybody that's joining this Wikibon discussion. We've got a CrowdChat going with the hashtag of True Private Cloud. We're going to have a few members of the Wikibon community, some of us on the video. Joining me from his massive studio in Raleigh, North Carolina is Brian Gracely. Brian, say hi.
Hey, Stu, how are you? Good to see everybody.
I'm doing great. Thanks. So I'm in the Marlboro headquarters of Wikibon. I think Dave Vellante might be hopping on the video. John Furrier is on the West Coast. I see David Floyer's on the CrowdChat. And what we're going to do is we've got an hour set up to really share some of the content that we've created on True Private Cloud. And we'd love feedback and questions from the community. So to start it out with, if you haven't seen on wikibon.com, we launched our definition of what we call True Private Cloud in December, and then we launched a forecast about a week ago. Right at the end of January, beginning of February, we put out our 10-year forecast for what True Private Cloud is today, where we think it's going, some of the big players, and that's what we're going to share and get into. So. I guess, Brian, I'll bring you in for a second. You and I and the Wikibon team has been looking at cloud for a long time. Give us your take as to what we did, why we did it, and let's get into the conversation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So last fall we published our public cloud forecast. Looked at who was leading in public cloud across all the categories: SaaS, IaaS, PaaS, and so forth. And then obviously the next logical place to look would be, let's look at private cloud. And what was interesting to us as we were talking to a lot of companies, not just the vendor community, but really the doer community, the customer community, was, this one thought kept coming back to us, which was, we're talking to a lot of people that say, well, I've built a private cloud, I'm building a private cloud. And as we would dig in a little deeper, really kind of peel back the onion, was, it felt like an overwhelming number of them were really just saying, well, I've virtualized some applications, I've consolidated some applications, I've virtualized some applications, I'm saving money. And then you would start to ask questions about, how much of that is automated? How much of that do you deliver to your internal user base as self-service? And some of the other characteristics that you might attribute to cloud versus virtualization. And, we started sort of scratching our head and saying, boy, it doesn't feel like a large enough percentage of these are really cloud in nature in terms of scalability, in terms of, the on-demand nature, those types of things. And so as we were doing our private cloud forecast and private cloud sort of analysis, what we ended up doing was sort of two things. One, looking at what sort of private cloud looked like in terms of the equipment, in terms of the people, in terms of all those things, but really trying to reset to a certain extent, what does true private cloud mean? Like where is the marketplace today for those people? And, are there things that sort of have to change operationally, technology-wise, to allow IT organizations to really sort of be competitive if they think they're building a cloud environment?
Yeah, Brian, you went through a lot of really good stuff there. I think from the converged infrastructure standpoint, a term that jumped out at me is we talked about from an infrastructure standpoint, people were building snowflakes.
Yes.
So often they were doing so much work themselves, and when they put it together, there wasn't a lot of standardization. Any scripting or automation was something that they really had to build themselves. And if you talk about what I want to get from a cloud, is I want to have something that services that I can leverage, is a lot more standardized, and as you said, it would be nice if I talked to 10 people that had a private cloud, and there was at least something that you could hold up and say, how do we measure how good they're doing? Because as you said, every customer we talked to was doing something different. That's what we tried to say is a lot of this is very much an operational model as to how we do this, but on the same tide, you need to look at the infrastructure. You need to look at the management orchestration products, the tools that the vendor community is giving, because they can put these together. Hey, Brian, you've got a lot of experience with some of the service providers.
Yes.
I think so many service providers, they built their own software layer for that management and orchestration. Where is the maturity of that? What do you see the users doing? Maybe talk about how, as we go up the stack, what is going to enable customers to be able to get what we're calling true private cloud, and actually get what is a private cloud.
Right. So for service providers, what I've seen is in order to run their business, in order to be in any way successful, they've made huge investments around automation, right? Internally, their ability to take a customer order, take a customer request, be able to turn that into a service, turn that into compute service, storage service, whatever it is. That ability they've had for a long time. Now, how much of that is very broad orchestration systems versus a lot of homegrown scripts is, a lot of it is much more of the sort of homegrown script thing. And part of that is because, the tools that, many vendors had gone to market with kind of started off as enterprise tools or dev and test kind of tools, lab management kind of tools. And they tried to sell them to service providers. And, the challenge is it's really hard to take an enterprise or lab type of tool, make it scale for a service provider. And so, that's why you're seeing many of them, started to look at some of these open source tools. They looked at CloudStack, they've looked at OpenStack. They're building things out of those pieces and parts. And the other part of it that's different, especially for the service providers, is a lot of them built their businesses around hosting, around managed services, and the economics of that are different. They would, customers were buying things not so much on demand, but they wanted a longer term contract. And so as they now begin to sort of compete with the on-demand services, the Azures, the AWSs of the world, they're trying to figure out economically, what do they have to retool in terms of technology, but also how do they change their business model?
Yeah, Brian, there was a good comment in the CrowdChat from it's Ed Morgan, and he said much of this is the discussion we've been having for a number of years, that to really be a private cloud, I need to be more than just virtualization, or even more than just virtualization plus. I know that comment resonates with me, and one of the reasons that we really tried to dig in, because if we were to say before, go to a customer and say, okay, is what you have a private cloud? And it was really open to interpretation. So we wanted to put a lot more rigor, be able to measure what's going on there. And it was definitely a good robust debate internally, and something we've been talking to our community on. So I'll give a little bit of feedback I've heard from the community, and Brian, definitely want you to hop in as you want. But in general, I think people feel that we are finally getting to a maturation that what we're deploying look more like what a private cloud should be. I always like to look at it as it's certain gradations. So Brian, you brought a customer story to me where you said a guy said it used to take me 2 months to do this, and I can do it in 2 hours, and that's phenomenal. And on the one hand, as an infrastructure guy, I said that's great. It reminds me of what virtualization did to help speed things up. But I look at what if I was using AWS, that 2-hour thing might have just been 1 or 2 clicks, and therefore it would have been done in seconds or minutes, or something much less. So it's not necessarily about saying that private cloud needs to have everything exactly like what public clouds can do, but it is moving down that spectrum of getting out of that undifferentiated heavy lifting, about moving some of the operational burden over to either the platform or to the vendor that's going to be providing it to me.
Yeah, and I again, like you said, the goal of this was in no way to sort of beat that dead horse that private cloud is not virtualization in your data center. That's been going on for a long time. I think the goal of this was to really say, as much as cloud is about speed, it's about agility and so forth. IT is still a very cost-driven organization. They still have to get to a point where people are going to look at what it costs. They're going to look at alternatives for what it costs. And we really wanted to sort of reset the bar for them to say, look, if you're kind of totally set on this belief that it's just virtualization, there's a chance that if you're not trying to find simplicity, you're not trying to drive some of that cost that will align with speed out of your system, you may find yourself struggling. And Wikibon's always been an organization that's been, trying to help end customers, end users, doers. And so, doing this was really trying to help them go, how should I rethink this bar, but also start to help them understand that the technologies are coming along that are getting better to help them as well, not just, set a big goal out there and give them no path to get there.
All right, so Brian, we got a question coming in from our chief analyst, Dave Vellante. What were some of the key tentpole findings of the event? So you want to take a first tack at that?
Yeah, I think, a couple of things. One thing that we found, especially in talking to, in-depth, doing in-depth interviews with end users, is we were beginning to see people who are actually separating their virtualization environment, which they looked at as being very, cost, drive out costs, and they were starting to build these sort of private clouds separately. So we were seeing sort of a different effort than just the virtualization piece. Thought that was sort of interesting, not just, well, I have VMware version whatever, and if I add this new thing, that'll be it. They really were beginning to say, hey, look, it's about delivering APIs. It's about helping developers. The other thing we found as we were doing the forecast and counting is this is not a simple thing to count. There is not a line item from most vendors or even from a lot of cloud providers that says cloud. People count it differently. They include different things. We had to sort of sort through a lot of marketing. So those things were sort of jumped out at us. And then the headline that I put in one of my pieces was, even with our best estimates of where true private cloud is today, and trying to be somewhat generous in the counting, it's still almost 4 times. It's 3.5 to 4 times smaller than where the public cloud in terms of IaaS is today. And I think that surprises a lot of people because they think, while the public cloud's growing fast, it's still smaller. But in terms of delivering like for like capabilities, what's going on in the private cloud is significantly smaller, and that's going to be a wake up call for a lot of people.
All right, I'll give my feedback. You can answer some questions on the crowd chat while I'm talking, Brian.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's been an interesting discussion with really both the practitioners and the vendor community. Over I'd say the last 12 months, we do see that shift as people trying to understand, really where that next battle is. Wikibon, we put out a research, gosh, it was a 1.5 years ago, saying that if you looked at most of the solutions, take storage specifically for virtualization, the delta as to how well they integrated with VMware, wasn't, that differentiated anymore. So, compared to 2 or 3 years ago, there were a couple of main leaders, companies like NetApp and EMC, really got much more market share in the virtualization environment than some of the other guys did. But it was really that kind of that management and orchestration layer, because that's where we can attack, a huge piece of the overall, IT budget. So I popped into the crowd chat here, our curves of where spending is going to go. And, it's one of these real hot button items. If we look at enterprise infrastructure spend, there is today $300 billion that is spent on the operational staffing costs. And what we see the opportunity is for that there to be a shift in, we show half of those dollars, so over $150 billion over the next 10 years that are going to shift out of just keeping the lights on, operational work, and shift into the platforms. So number one is that the operational costs are always a little bit tough to measure, but this does not necessarily mean that, oh, well, hey, half the people that are employed in IT are going to get fired. What it really means is there will be shifts as to what they'll be working on. They will be working on building new applications. They will be working on some of those platforms that help deploy the solutions. There should be less. We always talked, if you were, the network administrator and all you're doing is setting up VLANs. If you're the storage administrator and you're setting up, what capabilities the LUN has access to, you're really going to need to change your jobs. So, we've seen that shift as to, tying IT closer to the business. And both the user base is becoming more mature in their discussion, and the vendor community is really, either through acquisitions, through startups that are coming into the space, or just maturation of the product line. There are a lot of things going on here. I'll bring up one, Brian. You and I are going to be at the OpenStack Summit in Austin, in a couple of months, and the OpenStack community. I think one of the big challenges for OpenStack, up till now, has been that it hasn't been real easy to stand up that environment and make it real easy. And there's a number of players, some of the big companies and some of the startups, that are starting to really operationalize how OpenStack gets deployed. And that, I guess, one of the big promises of OpenStack is this is going to be what helps customers build, their cloud or the cloud services that they're going to use.
Right.
So, what are you seeing? Who are some of the interesting players in that space?
Yeah, that's an area. I mean, the things that you were just talking about are really all about operational efficiency, right? We've heard for a long time people saying, well, one admin per 10 servers moving to 100 servers. And then you hear, the large web scale people doing, one per 1,000 servers or 10,000 servers. The interesting trend that we're kind of starting to see is some of these companies that, whatever your opinion is on something like OpenStack or whatever your cloud management platform is, they're operationalizing it. So, companies like Blue Box that IBM acquired last year, I believe it was last year, essentially take OpenStack technology and operationalize it. You just consume the VM resources, the storage resources. Cisco acquired MetaCloud. It's now part of their MetaPod product. Again, you're just simply consuming the underlying resources. You don't have to think about how it's automated. You don't have to think about how all that cloud management is upgraded. The knock on OpenStack being it's really hard to upgrade. Well, then don't worry about it. Let somebody else do that for you. And then some of the smaller startups that are starting to emerge, like Platform 9, that just recently won a deal with Box.net. So you've got a small company that's able to help a large web scale company, companies like Zero Touch. And the thing that's really interesting about those 4 companies, and there's some others out there, is they're giving companies the option of saying, where companies have some concerns about cloud. If they're thinking about private cloud or security, where does my equipment live? Almost all of those companies are now offering the ability to not only sort of manage and host your environment in their data center, but they'll do it with your equipment on premises. So, if economically it makes sense for you to own the equipment, or rent or lease the equipment, but you physically want to have it for compliance reasons, they're able to do that too. So, they're giving you the operational benefit of having a really rock star staff of people in operations, and your company just internally just uses the resources. So that's a big trend we're starting to follow, and we're seeing shifts in that space.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Brian. I think the way we position it in the research is it's not so much about where it's located. It's really kind of the ownership, as you said. So underneath our true private cloud, we have what was the terminology we used, Brian? It was the hosted true private cloud and enterprise true private cloud. I was trying to remember that one.
Yeah, and I think we tried to say focus less on the locality and focus on on the capabilities. So people sometimes want to get into, is it a private cloud? Is it a hosted managed cloud? Or at the end of the day, it really comes down to, maybe it involves, do you own the asset or not? But then it really just becomes, are you consuming it, or are you having to build it yourself? And I think the overwhelming thing we've seen is, 5, 6, 7 years, even into virtualization, the building it yourself and operating it yourself is a steep learning curve for a lot of companies. And I think we're going to start seeing them start looking for assistance in that.
All right. So I'm going to post into the CrowdChat now, Brian. So really what we have is the vendors that are leading in this space. Maybe you can give a little color as to kind of what is and what isn't counted in this space, and let's give a couple examples for the users.
Yeah, sure. So the names that you're going to see on this list, a lot of them are going to sound very familiar. You're going to see HP, you're going to see VMware, you're going to see EMC with the inclusion of what they do around VCE and so forth. But you're also going to see companies like Nutanix and some others. What we essentially said was, how much of what those companies do can we count against this definition? So their underlying infrastructure that counts against this definition. In most cases, it's going to be their converged infrastructure platforms. It's not just every server or storage they sell. It's got to be that simplicity of converged infrastructure. It's where they're distinctly providing automation for that to again simplify the operations. And there's some assumptions we had to make in terms of total quantity. So I'm sure we'll get some pushback from the vendor community saying, hey, this is cloud and that's cloud. But we really kind of had to balance that against, hey, as we talk to end customers, to doers, what percentage of them were telling us what they had was a private cloud, functional private cloud, not just virtualization, and and try and factor that into our number.
Yeah, so Dave just put a question in there, kind of what about AWS? Are they going to have a true private cloud play? My take on this, and one of the discussions we had internally is, do we call this private cloud? Do we call this hybrid cloud? Where does hybrid cloud fit into this? Part of our definition is that a true private cloud will have links into the hybrid cloud, so it should be able to leverage some of those public cloud services. Amazon, really, the focus for them is on the public cloud, and they are going to link into your environment. So VPC is usually the link into the environment. Use the network, really extend a customer's environment into the public cloud. But it's really kind of the straw that sticks down into my data center. While we might be able to argue whether some of the special solutions like Amazon built for certain government agencies look kind of like private clouds, it's really more a public cloud that they're just making a region or an availability zone in their environment. So I think that's one of the reasons we called it private. What's your take on that, Brian? AWS in general, some of the hybrid discussion.
Well, fundamentally, what AWS has always said is we think that we can operate a cloud environment better than you can internally. And that's a lot of where their early growth came from. It was companies that said, either I don't want to invest in that. So if I was a startup, I don't want to invest in sort of the underlying what would be IT operations. And then as more and more enterprises or government mid-market customers moving there, they're saying, look, I want to spend more of my focus time on the applications. From a true private or hybrid perspective, Amazon came out this last fall and said, hey, we're going to start talking about the word hybrid. And hybrid use cases, like you talked about, VPC is at the core of that. Their storage gateways are at the core of that. The ability to basically say, look, we realize you're going to have to extend back to some existing applications. They just won't make sense to move, or it's not cost effective to move. But for the things that you're going to change, that you're going to add on to, that you're going to make modifications to, it will, in their belief, make much more sense to run in Amazon's cloud, and they're going to provide you the network, the security to make that happen. So things are starting to converge. They're becoming less discreetly just public versus just private. But Amazon's, even though they don't put a box on your premises, they're very, very well positioned to be part of that hybrid discussion. And now that they're willing to talk about hybrid, I think we'll hear more from them in that space.
Okay, so there was a question looking at those market shares as to how we calculated. So just to give the community a little bit of insight into that, it really is us looking at the products, the solutions that are out there, and what percentage of them we felt are fitting our definition. So if we look, number 10 on our list is Nutanix, hyper-converged with the software stack that Nutanix has. You look at what SimpliVity is doing with their space. Would be another company that a high percentage of what they're doing fit under the definition that we have, as opposed to if I take a company like VMware, it's made up of a certain percentage of their converged infrastructure solutions. So that's the vSAN software revenue that they have, and that's kind of the main piece from VMware. So usually it's a piece of converged infrastructure. It's cloud software and there's certain other data center services and revenue that goes into it. Yeah, Brian, maybe from your take, what are we counting? What aren't we counting? And what about take somebody like EMC and a VirtuStream? How would we look at their revenue?
Yeah. So, like I said, we tried to be as true as we could from accounting perspective to the definition we laid out there. So, converged infrastructure is the underlying hardware baseline. Cloud of the virtualization piece. Hence, why you're seeing VMware so high in there. There's a revenue impact there, and obviously that's spread across a number of solutions. The cloud management piece, and really looking at the market, what the market is telling us about adoption of that cloud management. So, just to give people an example, you read through VMware's quarterly results and numbers and so forth, and they'll tell you that adoption of things like vRealize is probably like around a 17% range. So, while you may want to count a bigger number, you have to look at what's being adopted. You have to look at how the vendors are reporting it, and then we have to justify that against how much of that software maybe is just in an ELA but not being used by customers, and how much customers and doers are telling us that they're actively deploying that. So those things are in there. We tried to make some assumptions about where services made sense to count as a number. We obviously don't want to make services a huge piece of this because, again, to get to a cloud model, it's got to be simpler. It can't be about having a services organization hanging out at your site on a constant basis. At that point, you're probably much better off looking at having somebody else manage it and operate it for you.
Yeah, Brian, there was a comment John Furrier posted from Floyd Strimling that said, finding the resources and talent to build and operate a private cloud, and add on top of that the cultural changes, and that's a lot to ask the enterprise. And I think that's one of the key points that we're talking about in this research, is that if this is going to be a 6 month initiative, and a lot of heavy lifting by the user, it's failed. So it needs to be something that I can go. It should be something that I should be able to measure in, hopefully, days or weeks to be able to set up. Not the 2-year Taj Mahal that unfortunately IT has had to build in the past. And from an operational standpoint, look, there is going to be some retraining. There are going to be some changes. The solutions that I've liked hearing about is where the customer says, look, it kind of goes in, and once it's done, I really don't need to see it anymore. Upgrades are, I click a button and it's done. Adding new, pieces of infrastructure in are much easier than they were in the past. From my space in the hyperconverged environments, you talk about migration costs have been one of kind of the hidden killers of IT. IT really being able to get things done, and hyperconverged can really get rid of that, because adding the new components in don't require that I move all the data and get rid of the old stuff, and we spend weeks or months doing that in a traditional storage environment.
Yeah.
So Brian, what's your take on kind of the retraining and operational models there?
Well, it's a reality. It is a very difficult thing to do, and it's going to be very interesting to watch. We've been hearing this for a long time. The people and process part is harder than the technology part. But for the last 5-6 years, we've heard people say, "Look, I'm gonna give it a go. I'm gonna give it a try. I'm gonna try and do this." It's going to be very interesting, especially as we're seeing Amazon, Azure become more transparent in their numbers, talk about how fast they're growing. To how many business organizations, not just the IT people, the business organizations start saying, I don't know that I can wait that long. I don't know that that's an area I want to keep investing in. There was an interesting study that came out from Red Hat a couple of weeks ago, and they basically sort of said, here's what it costs to run an OpenStack environment, OpenStack private cloud. And while the numbers are interesting, they kind of did their own internal studies. The thing that jumped out at me, and I'll post the link in the CrowdChat, was the starting point they had, sort of price per VM to operate something, and then the cost 2 to 3 years later was only about 50% less. So you start to ask yourself, am I willing to wait 2 to 3 years to reduce my costs 50%? Am I willing to make that kind of investment in training and so forth? Or do I look at a company who can come in and help me do this from the outside and refocus those resources on, applications and things that drive the business. So it's going to be really interesting. I think, something to really keep an eye on in this space is, what Microsoft's doing with Azure Stack in terms of saying, we're going to bring software to your data center that they're going to help run and look like our cloud. Oracle's trying to do something similar with their private cloud machine, and we'll see how that evolves. But I think the vendors are starting to hear the words of like, we can't keep up, and it impacts their business, and they're trying to figure out how to help customers in sort of new, unique ways. So that'll be an interesting trend to watch.
Yeah, Brian, I love that, and please do pop that link in. Yeah, there was a comment from Leo Leung talked about, he was agreeing with me, I think, that AWS doesn't need to go on-prem, but Microsoft is, and you just talked about Azure Stack. I expect 2016 we're going to hear a lot more from Microsoft. So, number one is, VMware has really lived on, a lot of the infrastructure environments. When we talk about convergence or even hyperconvergence, VMware has really led the way, and Microsoft has been doing real well with Azure, and they've got both sides of that equation on both the public and private environments. And with Azure Stack, they've got big push going on with their partners HP and Dell, and don't even need to talk about Hyper-V as much anymore because it's just Microsoft applications, how they're building out the Azure Stack. And as you mentioned, you got Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, and others are creating environments that fit into our true private cloud, or some people call enterprise cloud, which say, I have a stack that I can give you on-prem, and I've also got that same stack, or really close enough to that same stack, in our cloud. And so therefore you can choose whether I want really a CapEx purchase, I want an OpEx purchase, or I want some kind of blended model in between. And even starting to see applications that have spanning between what's happening on-prem versus in the cloud. We joke for years that cloud bursting was kind of a myth, but it's not necessarily moving data wholeheartedly, but we understand the physics and the challenges there.
Right.
But there are reasons that I'm doing transactions in the cloud, or just saving my data locally for compliance reasons, and that blurring of the lines between kind of my on-prem and my off-prem are definitely starting to show up a lot more.
Yep. No, absolutely. What are you seeing from a converged infrastructure perspective? We're now into sort of the second or even third generation of converged infrastructure. What are you seeing from those vendors, from customers, that lead towards them wanting more than just converged boxes? What are they doing from a software perspective, a delivery perspective? What other value add are they bringing that makes it feel like it's moving in this direction?
Yeah, so I did an interview with an end user who, it was a really interesting case study that had kind of a first generation converged infrastructure, and he moved to hyperconverged. And what he had said is, number one is, when I bought the converged infrastructure, I had my forecast as to what I was going to use over the next 3 years, and I really overbought. And when I buy the hyperconverged, I can buy in much smaller pieces, so that my utilization rate is going to just be inherently higher than what I had before. But number two, what they had is they had outsourced a good part of what they were doing in IT, and what they found then is, when the business was asking for them to build new applications and build new services, the outsourcer just couldn't do it. So what they needed to do is be able to bring back in, some of the services that they were doing before. Yet at the same time, their headcount had gone down. They actually cut their headcount down in half over the last couple of years. So wait, I need to take back in what I had to outsource before. I need to be able to respond to the business and do more. And I need to grow as I'm doing this. And I need to do all of this while I'm cutting costs. And that's where hyperconvergence helped them, because, as I mentioned before, putting it in is real simple, but it's that, kind of day one activity, the, upgrades. They no longer need to, spend time every 6 months saying, okay, wait, did I get everything in order? Do I have to line up all of my upgrades and patches? It's really, I can add new nodes when add capacity when I need it. I no longer need to tweak things as much for saying whether I've got the capacity or the performance I need. And upgrades are just push button. So the IT team can really spend much more time focused on those new applications, and add those into that more modern architecture, which is more flexible for how they manage both really the capacity that they need and the IOPS that they need. So it's been interesting to talk to some of those users, and those more advanced users of hyperconverged. When we've shared with them where we've put together for true private cloud, they really felt that definition met where they're looking to go with their environments, and the solutions that they were buying fit many of the criteria that they needed today.
Yeah, it brings up an interesting discussion about we're seeing this trend on the cloud side, on cloud native applications and development, where a lot of companies that sort of outsourced application development in the 2000s and so forth, the 90s and 2000s, are now trying to make these digital transformations. They feel like they lost that core skill. It'll be interesting to watch companies sort of how cautious or aggressive they get in saying, hey, look, I'm, if I'm struggling with finding this skill set, but I feel like I've got to go faster, I've got to have better operations. What are those characteristics that they look at to say, hey, am I comfortable, looking at one of these outside vendors or my technology vendor / service provider helping me with that? What sort of deals do they structure with them to make sure their people don't get sort of hollowed out? It's going to be, to me, a very interesting trend, because we know they're not able to keep up with hiring. We know they're struggling on that, but how comfortable do they feel, having maybe gone through this in other parts of their business? It's always an interesting, cycle that IT goes through, or different parts of the business go through.
Yeah, so we've got an interesting thread going on in the CrowdChat, looking at kind of the public markets. We've got one startup in our top 10 list, Nutanix, who has filed for their IPO, and as all of us know, the market's been on quite a slide so far this year. So what does true private cloud, what impact does kind of current market conditions have on that? Comment I'll make on Nutanix is I've had conversations with them. That we thought that they were going to IPO last year, and just what they said is they've been ready, but they're not in a rush. But they kind of felt the timing. When they announced at the end of the year, they published their S1 publicly, that they knew when they wanted to go. Of course, the market is not treating them well, but they're very Zen-like in the way they're thinking about it, which is if they are successful in what they're doing, we're going to look back 5 years from now and not say, oh, geez, remember what Q1 2016 was like? Nutanix is going to either move forward or face their challenges for their competitors. And if they go public, they're on the march to go public. They will face their challenges there and have to be transparent as to how they're making money. And of course, there are lots of discussions as to when a company becomes profitable. Boy, I know I'm talking to a lot of startups these days. That next round of funding, depending on where you are in the fundraising cycle, can be very difficult. There was one hyperconverged player that I covered in 2015 that went under, Nimbox. And it's not the best time to be looking for more money. What's your take on the financial side, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, you obviously know Nutanix much better than I do. The markets are, I don't want to say they're really tough these days. I mean, I think people are I listened to a good interview with Goldman Sachs yesterday. In essence, they're saying, look, we're looking for companies that look like real companies, that have business models, that have revenues and profits and things that people want to pay for and are willing to pay for them, and have a longer term forecast. So in that sort of definition, I don't know that's detrimental to Nutanix. I think they've shown they've got a business, they've got revenues. Are they as profitable as maybe they should be? The market will decide that. What's interesting to me is they're making an approach that says, hey, we're not necessarily going to be 100% dependent on VMware anymore, right? They've got their own sort of software stack at this point, their own virtualization stack. And what was interesting to me in a lot of customer interviews was there is a penchant there for people to say, I'm willing to look at other things. I'm willing to look at other technologies, whether it was something like OpenStack, people are using Amazon Web Services. I think there's a realization, at least at some level, that if I wasn't able to get to where I want to get to with VMware, if VMware was really only there from a virtualization perspective to help me reduce costs, I'm open to looking at other things if it's going to work. So, I think that plays in Nutanix's favor in terms of, is there a possibility that their technology stack and their technology bet, can broaden in the marketplace. So I think that's going to be an interesting thing to watch.
Yeah, there's an interesting comment here I'll share from the CrowdChat. Ken Hui said, is enterprise cloud code for the same old virtualized infrastructure with a portal slapped in front of it with tons of professional services attached? I think it's an interesting commentary and goes to, what we talked at the beginning about kind of what is true private cloud and what is the private cloud that isn't repeatable. And, we've looked at many of the private cloud solutions that we talked to, which are very much services led. Dave Vellante likes to talk about cloud and the marginal economics that are going. If I need a lot of professional services to get this up and keep it running, it's probably not going to fall under our true private cloud definition. It needs to fall much more like a software product. It needs to be something that is much more, there's definitely going to be some planning that I need to put in place and work to make sure I size it, but there needs to be more standardization. I need to work through that automation so that, I don't have to have, take all my VM admins and everybody that was doing everything else and just have them with different knobs and different things that they need to adjust. What do you think, Brian? Do we have enough people that are really going to deliver on that, or do they think they can still bang away on the old model?
Well, I think if you look at our thing, the reason we were sort of strict about the definition was, if you're not able to deliver that at a faster rate, at some measurable rate, that's faster and at a cost that's going to be in line with roughly where you can get from the private market or the public market, markets have a tendency to find equilibrium. Right now, we have a huge discrepancy between how long it takes to get resources internally, what it costs to get resources internally. We've pointed out some data points. There are plenty of others. People are more than welcome to slap a GUI in front of some virtualization and call it private cloud. The problem is if you're looking at that as, am I adding value to my business? The answer that we've seen is not necessarily, right? You reach a point where you can only take so much cost out of what you're doing through virtualization. You've got to add agility and speed, and you're not going to do that by just putting a web page in front of virtualization. So. I know there's people that are skeptical about, can all this happen? I think what we're encouraged by is looking at, some of the new thinking that some of the vendors have, that some of the service providers have around doing this. Again, the thing about it is, you mentioned this almost every time we talk, infrastructure is there in place for applications. If the application teams ultimately feel like it takes too long to get the infrastructure, in years past, they were stuck. Nowadays, they've got options. They've got public cloud options. They've got plenty of options. This market will rectify itself, whether the infrastructure teams and virtualization teams want to be part of that or they don't. And really, it'll just be a matter of sort of how long that transformation takes or doesn't take.
Yeah. So Brian, we did some research last year looking at kind of the operational models of kind of private cloud versus public cloud. And once you were up and running, I could get things to be, at least within the same order of magnitude, similar. Migration costs are difficult, especially if you're talking about applications. Forklifting my existing application and shoving it into some different model, can be very different. What I'm curious, you've been doing a lot of digging. The cost of resources in public cloud versus private cloud, how those looking these days? Are they similar? Are they very different? If I said, I want a VM and I want to throw it in Amazon versus I want a VM and I want to put it on, an OpenStack environment. What are you seeing today?
Yeah. Cloud pricing is always sort of interesting. It depends on what you count, because you take into consideration things like if you're just comparing VM prices, you're not including bandwidth, you're not including other stuff. But it's the pricing for public VMs is again it's all dependent on how good your operations team is. It could be anywhere from 20% cheaper to 60, 70, 80% cheaper, right? I mean, if, you put it in perspective, if I can spin up a VM in, let's call it an hour, and you've got an internal company who's really happy that you can spin it up in a week or 2 weeks or something. And trust me, we've heard plenty of companies who say, look, we're really happy. We've moved from, 8 weeks to 1 week from virtualization. You think about the cost of an employee, you think about the cost of, kind of opportunity cost in a week is enormous. So it's a weird calculation to make. If we just look at it purely on, dollars per CPU and so forth, the cloud is moving very fast, and we now have competition. I mean, Google and Azure are pushing Amazon's pricing downward, and they're sort of following Moore's law. So complicated answer, but public cloud is still going to be cheaper, at least in the near term, than you're going to find on premises when you include data center cost, operations cost, and sort of the whole package.
Yeah. What was interesting to me is over the last year or so, the discussion of the race to zero has kind of died out. While public cloud, will have competitive pressures and they are driving the price down, I hear the enterprise guys all call that commodity cloud, which it always makes me laugh a little bit, because if I think kind of commodity and saying, oh well, it's cheap and it doesn't do as much as what we do, it really always calls to my mind the innovator's dilemma, which is you look at how fast they're adding functionality, they're listening to their customers, they've got that big pinwheel of innovation, kind of building on what they're doing. That I'd sure be concerned about that. But yeah, as you said, it's as we always like to say, there's horses for courses for what we're doing, and it is not a winner take all for either what segment things go in, or even in each segment, who's going to win out there. Amazon's facing tough competition from a number of players. The transformation of what's happening in infrastructure, does take a long time. It's one of the reasons we put our forecasts out for 10 years. We understand the kind of the inertia, the buying power, all the challenges that we have to make some change. But I have been really pleasantly surprised as to more and more users that I talk to are trying new things. The friction to be able to start something new has lessened in a lot of environments. That was my top word for 2015 was kind of frictionless discussions. I got a note from Dave as we're getting close to the end as to what advice do we give to the practitioners? What should they be looking for? Brian, I'll let you start, and then I'll hop in with my thoughts.
To me, the simplest thing I would say is, because we could give a whole litany of things, is, be realistic in looking at, trying to do a measurement between what does it take for me operationally to do some basic tasks. Where is my company at today? So those basic tasks might be as simple as somebody requests a virtual machine with an operating system on it and some bits and allocated storage and networking and IP addresses. And, how long does that take? What does that cost? Be realistic with yourself and count everything it costs. And then measure that against, what it costs you for a day or an hour in one of the leading public cloud providers. And I think what we're going to see for a lot of customers is they're going to be very surprised at the difference in that. And then, hopefully they're going to look at that and say, boy, if I want to remain competitive now that the markets are very transparent, what do I have to do to resolve that? So, don't make this into an enormous sort of problem solving thing. Start with some baselines. The data is out there. We'd be happy to help some people if they want to try and baseline that. Start there, and then, be very realistic in evaluating, where you can get better. And does it make sense to do it yourself, or does it make sense to look for assistance from people?
Yeah, that's really good point there. And one thing we're definitely looking for is feedback from the community, and really appreciate it. It's been a good, robust crowd chat.
Yes.
The video for this session will be available on demand. The crowd chat's going to stay open for a little bit while longer, and of course, Brian, myself, the whole team, really easy to get in touch with, through Twitter, through the Wikibon.com site. But yeah, it's I think, Brian, for me, it's as you're talking to the vendors and potential solutions that you're looking out, you want to see some of those project plans. It's not just about, okay, show me 5 customers that have done this, but how much standardization is there involved? How many checkboxes am I going to do? And I think back to the old PC environments. It was great that I could go buy a Dell and I can go check and tweak every single environment that I had, and there's many of us that loved doing that. But when it comes to the data center, I need to understand where is their flexibility, where is their standardization, how do I grow it, how do I manage it, how fast is it going to take me to train my people to do it, and what's the average time that people spend on managing those upgrades. There was some good commentary in the CrowdChat talking about how self-service really something is, and that is something that's for many of the solutions really a little bit more aspirational. It's been something that I think we've all been looking for, but at least it should be simpler to be able to do this. It shouldn't be this chain that I have to, okay, I do this, and then that kicks off some process from some other person, and they need to go buy something, plug something in, or do anything. Heck, Brian, you and I have a lot of networking background. Is networking the bottleneck still, or can it help that? So, what other comments do you have as we're getting towards the end?
I think my other comment is I hope some of these attempts to sort of raise the bar will influence the vendor community. I was looking at something the other day. Pat Gelsinger famously said, or one of the EMC executives famously said, I think it was 2013. They said, we can't lose business to that bookstore AWS, because if we lose it, we'll never get it back. VMware was came up about $1 billion short of Amazon's revenue this last year. I think the vendor community needs to be very aware that, like you said, those things they call commodities aren't commodities. This new buying behavior and expectation is very real. The numbers are very real, and I expect to see them step up their R&D and their creativity and try and be more competitive in this marketplace than maybe they have been in ignoring this desire of doers and customers to want to be more on demand and faster.
Sorry, had you unmute there. So one of the questions coming in is we're obviously going to get feedback from a lot of the vendors as to why aren't we on that top 10? What are you counting? From a converged infrastructure standpoint, if we go through and look at the criteria, what is the software stack they have built up? How easy is it to manage the entire solution? Today, most of the converged infrastructure, we're maybe getting 10 to 20% of their environments, counted in the number that we have. So if we look 2015, the number's small. One of the big opportunities we see in 2016 and beyond, as the vendors really build out their software stack, as they standardize some of the solutions, there's real opportunity to expand what percentage of the environments you're shipping fall under this category. And definitely we welcome feedback from everybody if you think we've miscategorized something. So specifically in there, it's there's billions of dollars of converged infrastructure in there, and if you took the top guys in there of Cisco with all of their solutions, VCE, NetApp, Oracle, IBM, HP, it's a very small percentage today. We've had conversations with most of these companies, and in general, they seem to agree with the general direction. They might not necessarily agree with how much we're counting today, and therefore we'll have some fun wrestling, over the next months to see where things go going forward. And this is of course research. We'll be updating on on a fairly regular basis. It's the major research gets updated once a year, but if it makes sense, we can have intermittent notes in there.
Yeah, well, and absolutely, these sort of discussions drive transparency, and ultimately transparency is good for customers. They want to know how well vendors are doing, their suppliers are doing, and we welcome the conversation for any vendors who think maybe we misrepresented or miscounted or whatever. I think our biggest goal is we'd like to establish this new buying pattern, this new usage experience, and if it helps us drive some transparency or just different way of how they represent what their numbers look like, I think that's great. I think it's great for the community, and it's great for customers to know, how far advanced their suppliers are these days.
Yeah. Okay, Brian. We definitely have some more questions that we can handle on the crowd chat, but I want to get the video wrapping up. You and I are going to be at a number of events where we'll be talking about all this cloud stuff. Myself, I'll be at the OpenStack show. EMC World's one that we always talk about. What's going on there? Nutanix has their conference. How about yourself? What are some of the cloud shows and events that you're going to be at?
I'll be at IBM Interconnect here in about a week or so. A lot going on around open source and OpenStack and those things. We'll be out at the Google Next event, really interested in where Google's going in the enterprise with Diane Green. And then, like you said, we'll be at the OpenStack Summit. We'll be at EMC World, DockerCon this summer. So, a lot of stuff just even in the next couple of months. Great opportunity to talk to the community and be out and see what people are doing and what their aspirations are.
Wait, Brian, we almost got an hour into this. Doesn't Docker change everything now? I mean, we can just throw out everything we're talking about.
I know we went an hour without Docker. So that'll have to be the next conversation. So it's 2016. Maybe things are changing a little bit.